Tropical storm Fiona continues to move west and continues to strengthen. I'm 5 News Chief Meteorologist Matt Standridge. A Hurricane Hunters mission, the first one, has now wrapped up. They've been surveying with the aircraft right over the center of the storm, and this thing has strengthened with now up to 60-mile-per-hour winds sustained at its core and gusts up to 70 miles per hour. That's a little bit stronger than originally expected. This thing is sitting over some very warm waters in the high seas and may continue to strengthen very slightly the next couple of days, but there are some limiting factors as well. We're going to break those down for you. But that mission is headed back home to the U.S., and more missions are likely to take place as we get more data from the storm. We put them in our forecast models and solutions, and we are able to better forecast where this thing is heading next. Let's talk about what the storm is experiencing right at this moment and where it may be headed. Eventually it's headed west, and then it may wrap a little bit farther towards the north, getting closer to the North American continent, towards the United States. We're going to talk about where it may end up for the next week or so. But right now, the center of the storm is a little bit off-center. When you take a look at this massive cloud, generally a circle shape, the storm loves to have its core right at the dead center of it. That allows a better strengthening process when everything is even. Well, right now it's not. The core of the storm is a little bit farther west. This thing is kind of tilted a little bit. It's kind of wobbling. There's some environmental winds around this storm that are impacting this tropical storm as it moves westbound. Usually storms like to just kind of have clear, open water with very low winds. It likes to bring its own winds. It doesn't want to have other winds impacting it and kind of threatening it. But right now it does. So this thing's a little bit sheared off on its western side. So it's a little bit off-centered, but it is still slowly strengthening and slowly getting a little bit bigger. You can see those cloud masses continue to vent out and move westbound overall too. Right now this thing is moving at 14 miles per hour for the next couple of days, probably through the rest of the work week and to the very start of the weekend. It just sails directly westbound. There have been a couple wobbles, though, maybe a little bit farther south. If that continues, we'll be talking about the southern half of this cone for its trajectory. But right now, headed towards the Leeward Islands. These are the first islands that you'll impact as you try to enter the Caribbean Sea. After that, by this weekend, we're talking about getting closer to Puerto Rico. And then as we head into next week, we get that curvature off towards the north. Here's the overall path as we head towards the Caribbean, at least the northeastern Caribbean, and then into the western Atlantic, maybe even skimming the Gulf of Mexico. The question is where it goes by the middle of this coming week. Right now, expectations are by the start of the week, Monday, Tuesday, this thing gets very close to hurricane status. You're talking about 70-mile-per-hour winds. Remember, to get to hurricane, you got that 74-mile-per-hour wind threshold you've got to reach. This thing continues to move a little bit farther towards the north. Big question is, what's in its way? Right now, there's a boundary. See these clouds right now from Florida and into parts of the northern Bahamas and then stretching out into the Atlantic. There's a boundary right here. Storms don't like to go into boundaries. Sometimes that kind of alters their course, but this thing may weaken and just kind of fizzle out over time. Right now, it's kind of acting like a wall, but if this thing can dissipate, this storm will be able to knock right through it. We're not sure exactly where it's going to go. You know, this thing can easily curve well off towards the east, just bringing rip currents towards the U.S. mainland, but we've not had any kind of impacts so far on the U.S. coast with any kind of tropical storms or systems this summer. That may change with Fiona. We'll just have to watch. But as of right now, this thing is just moving westbound, and then the expectation is to curve a little bit farther north once it reaches the Dominican Republic. Once you get towards Hispaniola, maybe just avoiding Cuba. Now, a couple of good things in terms of, for society, not for the hurricane. As it goes over some of these islands as a tropical storm, still bringing a lot of wind and waves and rain to a lot of the islanders, but at least it's not at hurricane strength, although if things change, this thing could try to strengthen, but it's got a couple factors. It's got a couple roadblocks it's got to go through as it kind of hits all these islands after one another. Hurricanes don't like islands. I know they come to them, but they kind of rip the storm apart a little bit. So that may keep the storm a bit weaker. After that, though, it's anyone's guess on where it heads. So we want to continue to give you updates. Let's talk about a little bit where it's headed this weekend and where it may go on after that. So by the time we get to Sunday, about late morning local time for San Juan, Puerto Rico, the storm's coming in, bringing winds and rain and waves. Right now, expectations are around 65-mile-per-hour winds, so maybe a little bit stronger than the storm is right now. Very close to a Category 1 storm. We're kind of right on that threshold, but it's going to be a lousy Sunday for Puerto Rico. Now, after that, it moves west towards the Dominican. We're not exactly sure if the center of the storm will actually make landfall, the eye hitting the island itself, but it will be close enough that it just brings a lot of bad weather towards the island. And then after that, it starts curving off towards the north. We're not exactly sure where it heads after that, but we are watching Tropical Storm Fiona as this thing moves into very warm waters. However, there are a couple pieces of good news to share with you. There are things that hurricanes and tropical storms do not like. They do not like dry air. and they do not like environmental winds. They don't like to come into a chaotic environment. They don't like jumping in a pool that already has a bunch of waves. They like to make their own waves. Well, this thing is coming into some dry air and some chaotic winds, especially right over Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, and eastern Cuba. If this thing can move west and just barely clip this zone that's not favorable for the system, it may be able to strengthen and then move westbound towards the Bahamas, and after that, we're not sure. If it takes more of a southerly route, it'll be right through the core of some of this drier air and also the chaotic winds. That would help slow down the storm. It would help break it apart a little bit. Maybe not completely choke it out, but it may prevent it from strengthening too quickly. So there are a couple obstacles that this thing has to go through. So we want to put as many obstacles as we can, of course, in front of this storm. But likely as it reaches Puerto Rico towards Hispaniola, expect some dry air to kind of be ingested in the storm. When it goes through this dry air, it pulls it in, and that kind of disrupts the engine of the hurricane or tropical system. Here's a look at Futurecast as this thing moves westbound, coming over Puerto Rico for this weekend, then headed towards the Dominican Republic and Haiti, bringing some heavy rain, wind, and waves too. But then once it reaches the eastern shores of Cuba, we're not exactly sure if it just kind of rides the shore. Most likely it won't go much more west than Cuba itself, but it could ride the shore of Cuba and then approach Florida, or it may just head into the Bahamas and then eventually curve out towards sea. We'll continue to watch this storm and give you updates as Tropical Storm Fiona moves west.